Hello everybody and welcome to another session with us at Aucademy. There's lots of people on our screen today, it's lovely. I'm Dr. Chloe Farahar. I am a white person with a shaved head, giant glasses, a nose ring and a sort of dusty rose dress, which is nice and summery and one of my favourites. I'm joined today by lots of Aucademy people who do things on and off screen. So I'm joined today, I've got Ben, Si, Debbie, Jack, Spencer, David and Victoria. So I'm going to do some quick, brief physical descriptions. I'm going to start with Ben. Ben literally just says, I'm a potato. So today we will largely be voicing Ben's words for them, because we embrace our anxious autistic people using things like filters and not necessarily using mouth words, so that they can be confident enough to come on the screen and be with us today. We've also got Si, who has their own filter that they're using today. Si, physical description at all?
I'm a white person with a gorgeous beard under a purple filter beard, with a Viking hat with a slightly translucent horny love horns.
Thanks for that, Si. Debbie, if you could do a physical description.
Hi, I'm a white person with long brown hair and a stripy rainbow top.
It's very stripy and rainbow. You really like that, Debbie. It's lovely. And Jack.
Hi, I'm a white person with short brown hair and brown round glasses and a yellow and grey t-shirt.
Fantastic. Spencer?
Hello, I'm a 36-year-old white person sitting in an armless blue office chair wearing a dark gray t-shirt with a white infinity symbol with the words neurodiverse AF below it, and behind me is a plain white wall with no decorations.
Spencer, do you mind, can we have a look at the shirt that you're wearing? Lovely. So yeah, white infinity symbol with neurodivergent AF. I'm assuming it means as a swear word. Lovely.
That's fantastic, sure.
Oh yeah, awesome and fantastic, definitely as well. And David?
I am a white person in their 30s of Mediterranean descent. I have thick-rimmed square glasses, not quite as gorgeous beard as Si's, and a shaved head, lip piercing, and a ear gauge.
Thank you. And Victoria?
I'm a white person, just about in their 40s, with long, straight grey hair and wearing glasses.
Lovely, thank you. And because there's so many of us today and we're covering this topic of autistic social spaces versus autism social spaces and what's the difference, we're going to be really brief with when people discovered they were autistic. Usually we like to do a little bit of detail for people so we can get an idea of the diversity of our community, but there's so many of us on the screen today. So Ben, when did you discover you were autistic? Ben's like, I was not prepared for this question. If I remember rightly, you were 17 and it was because of school recognising and then you went through CAMS. Is that right? Something along those lines? CAMS in the UK is our Child Mental Health Services. Si, when did you discover you were autistic?
In 2017 also.
Okay, thanks. And Debbie?
Like 2 or 3 years ago. I can't really remember. I don't know. I think I think one of the university mentors told me to go to the University of Kent Autistic Group.
And that's actually, and we can talk about that because that's actually how I met and 3 of you, I think, on the screen through student services and the work that we've done on campus with autistic people. And Debbie, are you thinking about ADHD as well? Have you? I think we had that conversation.
Yeah, I was diagnosed last year, ADHD.
Lovely. And Jack, when did you discover you were autistic?
At the age of 18 in 2018, when I was having an assessment for
Jack's internet's gone a little bit patchy. Okay. I think I remember.
So they sort of suggest I should look into it.
Lovely. Thanks, Jack. Jack, you might just want to double check your internet if you've got anything else open, because your internet's a little bit patchy. But I believe it was when you were looking for a dyslexic or dyslexia assessment, if I remember rightly. I think that's what Jack was saying. Spencer, when did you discover you were autistic?
It was about 19 years ago, also when I was 17, but it took going through two to three different psychologists to actually reach that. But unlike a lot of other people, the reaction I got from the physician was actually very positive, which has been very rare. And my parents were also very happy. It was what I'm finding out, especially these past 10 years, is that is not the norm. So it's very different to kind of find that out.
And that's quite interesting, Spencer. We might have to have you on again because you're in America. And did you say 19 years ago, and it was quite a positive experience?
Yes, yeah, but that's pretty rare even here. It's very odd. My dad actually was diagnosed a few years ago, and very, very different experience. Almost just completely apathetic from the doctors. So we can talk about that at a different time. But I've got a lot of information about that.
Fantastic, thank you, Spencer. And David, when did you discover you were autistic?
So we kind of always knew it, but I didn't actually get diagnosed till I was 26, which was in, hang on, I have to remember how old I am. It was like nearly 7 years ago. Yeah, I got referred for an autism assessment by Adult Mental Health Services, sat on a waiting list for far too long, and walked into what was supposed to be the first of 3 2-hour assessments, and within 45 minutes they went, "We don't need to see you anymore, you're autistic."
I don't know if that's a good thing or, I mean, it's a good thing in the sense of like it's obvious enough that you didn't have to go through any longer assessments. That's good, but definitely interesting. And we're going to get to Victoria as well, but I just think this is all quite interesting because obviously we're going to be talking about autistic spaces versus autism spaces and social spaces. And I think particularly when you recognise or are discovered as autistic, you want those spaces. So I think it's quite relevant from all of you talking about the different time frames of you recognised an autistic. And Victoria, when did you discover you were autistic?
About 5 years ago, when I was 44, and it was because through my daughter, we were sort of formally identified around the same time, but at that time I came across other adults sort of older than me who are also autistic, and so we sort of went through it together. So it was around other autistic people.
Lovely. And that's so important, and that's also what I think we might bring up at some point during this discussion. So with my very first question, so we're talking today about autistic social groups, and I like to play devil's advocate, but isn't that an oxymoron? Autistic people aren't social, are they? Question mark. So anyone want to comment or have any thoughts on this? And Victoria's like, yes, I have thoughts on this. So we're talking about autistic social groups. Isn't it the case that we're not sociable people? Victoria, did you want to jump in?
I don't think we're not social in a neurotypical way. From that perspective, no, we're not. But from a neurodivergent way, yes, it's just a different form of connection and connecting in a different way. So that is how it's different, but
Lovely.
But it's still social.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Any other thoughts as well? Anyone want to add to what Victoria said? Spencer, then David?
Sure. So I think honestly, Victoria's spot on. There is a very narrow set of parameters regarding what socialization is, according to most neurotypical, and especially your medical field here in the States. And if you don't meet that, then it is determined there's a problem rather than actually examining how that person functions. In various social spaces with other autistics, I have had less anxiety. It's been very, very fruitful. But I really haven't changed. It's just the people around me. And so I think a lot of the times when that is said, or when people say that, it's really what they're saying is that we kind of refuse to engage in the needless social niceties or just the kind of debris of that interaction. So you actually get to meaningful exchange of information and discussion that is where you just don't need the sort of traditional preemption, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've made a note. So if you see me making notes, it's because I'm thinking, oh, you've made me think of something. I'm going to ask that now in a minute. So David.
Yeah, I think that the idea that autistic people aren't social is kind of rooted in that double empathy problem, because we have an entirely different set of communication styles to neurotypical society. And it's not just that, like we have an entirely different, well, not entirely different, but we have a vastly different sort of cultural framework in the online autistic community, and I think that it doesn't make sense to neurotypical people because they have this particular way of communicating that just feels alien to us. And when they see autistic people who have been pathologized and told that we have deficits and all sorts, actually successfully socializing, it creates like a bit of cognitive dissonance. And they don't really want to believe that we have social groups and that we can socialize with each other, because actually then they'd have to start treating us like people.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this idea that we're not social?
I think autistic people are incredibly social. It's a human thing to be around other people in whatever manner it is, whether it's in person or online. It's just that autistic people do it differently. We can literally just be in the same space. We don't have to talk. We can communicate in different ways. I think, and also the way that we've been brought up in society and the way we are treated, we tend to retreat from social events. So when we come to an autistic space, it's very different, and it's a lot more inviting.
I want to get into the nitty gritty of why as well in a second, because that all does interest me, because I remember, so Annette Foster and I ran, and Annette still does, the social group at the University of Kent for autistic people. And I remember a new student starting, and just the idea of a social group, even if it was an autistic social group, made them feel really nervous to join, because they were expecting what non-autistic socialization would look like or how they would experience it. So they were very uncomfortable with the idea of coming. Not only that, they also thought, but I'm a really awkward autistic person. It's going to be really awkward for me to sit in a room full of other awkward autistic people. But when they got there, they realized how different everybody was. And so that kind of, it balanced out that they felt really awkward and they were worried that they were going to be really quiet, but there were actually some other people who were having a conversation, not necessarily with mouth words. So yeah, it's just this idea of socialization is different. So I want to ask everyone, and feel free if you haven't had a chance to say anything just yet, if you want to contribute, you are welcome to. What is different then with our socialization? So David's also mentioned about double empathy, so that, we do communicate in a different way. Sai's mentioned that not everyone necessarily speaks or uses mouth words, for instance, but they're still socializing by being there. So what it might be different? So if I mention, what's the difference between small talk for an autistic versus a non-autistic person? Victoria? And then anyone else is free.
I think it's with sort of neurotypical people, the speech, there's a lot more toing and throwing. It's quite shallow. It's quick pace, but it's all about the norms. It's not actually about the subject to which you're talking about. Whereas in autistic spaces, the speech tends to be longer and it's talking more in depth about a subject, and that is accepted. Whereas within a neurotypical space, that is considered, you're going on and on too much and you're boring people, whereas that's not the case in an autistic space.
Thank you, Victoria. And I think, yeah, I've definitely, we noticed that, don't we? We're so used to being, I think, as a group here in autistic spaces, that we recognise that we are likely to monologue. So we might speak for a prolonged period of time and then the next person speaks. Or if we've also got ADHDers, we might inadvertently jump in because of that impulsivity and the need to say something. But I think what's really beautiful is that we all recognise that that person wasn't being rude. Nobody's being rude by monologuing. Nobody's being rude by their brain being so excited to tell the thing and they have to get it out, and then inadvertently maybe interrupting someone else. Might, you know, even if people feel frustrated, there's always understanding, which I think is really important. I'm just going to flag. So Ben here is saying that I would say I'm quite social, but just on my terms, around people I know and in a way I'm comfortable with. Often socialising in a way that is safe and comfy for me is thought of as weird by neurotypicals, which makes me withdraw from being social with them, therefore creating that idea we aren't social. And yeah, and our socialisation, I'm just trying to think how many of you on the screen have actually met in person. And it's quite, you know, our socialisation can be very much online. So there's a few people I've met in person, but also, you know, Victoria, for ages, I'd never met in person. And the first time I met them was like, you have legs, because we're so used to seeing each other in this box, right? So our socialisation, I like how everyone laughs at my jokes. You're all laughing at my joke. See, neurotypical people don't tend to find me funny.
Yes,
Whereas,
we're really laughing at the joke, yes.
Yes, thank you, Si. But we do find each other's sense of humour or understand it a bit more. Like sometimes neurotypical people don't find us funny. Was there anyone else that wanted to? Where are we? We've got. Was that Spencer?
I think Si was next, and then I was.
Si, is that a hand raised? Right, got you. So Si, then Spencer. And
what was the question?
What is different with our socialisation? How do we do it differently? And I kind of asked about small talk as well. What's the difference between small talk?
Oh yeah, with small talk, it might be part of a double empathy problem of us, or me, particularly not understanding NT communication. It feels like small talk, there's an agenda behind it. Whereas we wanting to actually share, and you know, we're not trying to be popular. And I mean, I am popular, so that doesn't really matter.
And Spencer?
So one of the things that I really like, this is it, and everybody's brought up great points, but one of the things that I really like is that when I can ask someone in these spaces somewhere else, as in, how are you feeling, or how is your week gone, or even just very much, are you feeling okay today? They will give a direct answer, and it may not be always a happy or good or whatever. They can say, I'm not doing well today, but that leads to an actual discussion of what they're working on, what they're doing, what's going on. And usually in both directions, that there's a sign of genuine interest. You know, like if I was to actually ask, you know, if I was to say, Si, how has your week gone? If he says terribly, I'd be wanting to know more. Whereas in neurotypical social spaces, if you say that, people, they kind of 404 or blank out a little bit because they don't know what to do next. You're disrupting the typical ritual back and forth, and that always kind of stymied me, because if you're going to ask, you know, if you're not going to be genuine about it, then why even ask that question? So contrary to popular belief, I feel, at least especially with our socials, there's a lot more empathy, a lot more empathizing, a lot more of that goes on than in some of the neurotypical spaces that I am residing in.
Lovely, thank you. And even, I know that this is because this is a live stream that we're doing right now, and there's so many of us on the screen, we're all kind of taking turns, but to some extent this is a lot of how our socials go, I think, as well, is recognizing and trying to keep a little bit of order, just so that everyone feels comfortable, that then knowing when they're allowed to speak. You know, so many of us struggle with that. When am I allowed to say something? So just letting people know, you could put a hand up or whatever it is you might like to. Debbie.
I think it's because there's no worry about honesty, about being direct. It's also a lot easier to be sarcastic and to be deadpan in humor. Like when I use a lot of deadpan humor anyway, and then neurotypicals get they cannot tell whether I'm being serious or not. And I'm like, no, I'm obviously not being serious. And it takes them like a few days to like get it. But I think, and I don't know what it is on their side that makes it difficult for them to understand it. But I think in autistic spaces, because if there was genuinely, because we're like kind of, I don't know, it's like the lines between literal and not literal are much easier to see. So.
And also, I just check with people. I just go, are you being serious or are you making a joke? And then the person will be like, oh, I was joking. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I can laugh now. Like, I get it. It's meant to be funny. We just check with each other a lot of the time. Ben says, because I said people are welcome to put their hands up if they want to, you know, contribute something. And Ben says, put a hand up, fully knowing I don't have hands, because Ben is currently a potato. But yes, thank you, Ben. And David. David works out how to.
Sorry,
it's all right.
my mouse was on the wrong side of the screen. So, yeah, I think one of the, not startlingly different, but it would be startling, I think, to, you know, people who are used to neurotypical socialization, is like the way we are just parallel with each other so often, you know, doing different tasks together, you know, not necessarily having a back and forth conversation and socializing in a way that other people might understand. But like, I know so many autistic people that some of the ways we enjoy spending time with is just sitting side by side, doing our own thing, being in each other's company. And I like that, because there's no pressure there, but you're still enjoying each other's company. And if you want to, you can sort of dip over and say, you know, how's your thing going? And they're like, oh, you know, it's going all right, you know, struggling with this bit. And how's your thing going? And yeah, no, my thing's going great. And it's just nice. It doesn't take me a bucket load of spoons to socialize when I'm parallel with people. You know, I think it would, I think if you're not used to seeing that, it could appear like we are being really antisocial, but it's not antisocial at all. Like, I think it's one of the main autistic love languages, in my opinion.
Yeah, many of us here, we body double. So like what do you call it, the parallel, like, I suppose, like into parallel play, where you just there in each other's company doing your own thing. You don't have to be talking to each other, but every now and again something will come up where you do just chip in and talk to each other. But it's helpful as well to actually do your work and just be.
And so many people, I think Victoria would like to say something, but I think so many people that I might meet, for instance, doing like consultancy work or whatever it is that I might be doing, and I suggest, got an autistic social space, I really recommend you going, because you're going to find people who get you and and maybe if you want to learn more about yourself and understand your autistic needs and all that kind of thing, but they're still nervous at the idea of going. And I like to be really clear with them and say, you know, you don't need to put the camera on, you don't need to have your microphone on, you can literally just be in that space and see how it is and how everybody else is interacting or not. Because I'm sure, I'm going to ask in a minute, because a number of you do actually facilitate the social group, you know, I'm sure there are periods of quiet in the socials, but that's okay. So there's not this need, hopefully, for people to fill in the empty silences, because it's not an uncomfortable silence for a lot of people. So just letting people know, yeah, you can go in, as long as we know that you are who you say you are. So we obviously want to make sure that people are, you know, they're who they say they are, basically, not somebody dodgy. We don't need people to have their cameras and microphones on, you know, so they can come in. And I definitely had a student like that who came to every social and we never saw them and we never heard from them. And they never used the chat box, but that was absolutely fine. They just wanted to be in that space and hear from others. Anyone else got any other thoughts? Yes, Spencer. Oh, sorry, Victoria, did you have, I couldn't tell if it was a hand raised or not before.
It was just that silence is accepted in autistic spaces and I can remember joining and being highly anxious because I didn't know how to be in that space. And also now I know that I can ask if I don't understand what is actually going on, because for so long I didn't understand, and a lot of it I didn't admit how much I didn't understand what was going on. But within that space, I know I won't be judged or humiliated by not understanding.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you brought up about the camera and audio thing, and that being both a facilitator and also a participant, that takes a lot of pressure off, because that way if you need to like stim or need to do something else, or you know, whatever, you can do these things, and there's, as Victoria brought up, there's not a judgment brought to that. Too often in various other meetings, there will be almost a hostility to you not turning on a camera, to the point where, and I'm kind of, you know, giving this up a little bit, I will say I'm having internet issues or something because I don't want to turn on my camera for some reason, whatever that day is. If I'm feeling self-conscious about the way I look, or if I just don't want to be reacting on camera because I'm working on something else, I can still participate. I can still be involved, but I'm not going to have that singular focus right into the camera. And I've noticed that in our socials, we have people that seem to really participate a lot more if that's not a requirement. It's a major critical thing, and I'm very pleased that we do that.
Lovely, absolutely. And I'm just going to flag as well, we've got Ben's comment too here. I'm going to move David. We don't need to see me. There we go, because it's a big chat box. So Ben says, I facilitated a Zoom social the other week and there wasn't someone to do mouth words to read out the chat, which worried me because of the silence. But the 2 hours went by, everyone having a great time using the chat box and just enjoying each other's company and talking, in quotation marks, which felt validating that mouth words aren't always compulsory or a necessity. And that's been so important in our spaces, to make that really clear that people can be included appropriately. Because so my next question that I want to ask, so this might also be about, I want to move into this about how we bring in, for instance, the chat box, and we make space for people who maybe take a bit more time to process and say their words and all this kind of thing, why that's so important. So my question is, how are autistic spaces different to non-autistic autism spaces? So when I say that, have any of you, for instance, do you feel you've ever gone either in person or online to a space that was held for autistic people, but it was run by non-autistic people, and so it was really not an autistic space, if that makes sense? So right, I've got Debbie, Jack was nodding as well, and Spencer was nodding. So I don't know if Debbie and Jack, if you want to have something to say about that. Debbie?
I was going to talk about the Attune meeting, which, okay, so like some of us are part of a research project for doctors, PhD people, and it's working with other universities. And Jack, actually, Chloe, could you explain what it is, and then I can explain what it was like.
Okay, so basically we won't go into too much detail about the project itself, but basically we have a young person's advisory group, and the idea was to bring them together because there's different young people across the UK, and so the idea was, let's do a little meetup, but largely online, but there were some people who were also in person. Does that help, Debbie?
Yeah, and so basically they knew that we're autistic, and they didn't, like, the whole thing was just chaos. We had no idea. They kept like there were technological issues which they should have tested out, and they were all sitting in the same room, and we were, for some reason, so there was so much echoing going on. I don't know. They were just basically, they hadn't thought about anything. And they're supposed to know. They're supposed to have to like kind of like, I don't know what's
Facilitate, maybe make the accommodations that might
yeah,
be needed.
they knew like about accommodations and stuff, and then he just didn't seem to think it was very important, and it was very important. So a lot of us found it really, really overwhelming. And stuff. So Jack, maybe you can add something.
Thank you. Yeah, so Jack, how do you feel that if you've been in autism spaces, how are they different to autistic spaces?
I think I'd agree with what Debbie said. I think she covered quite a lot of it quite well. In that there wasn't a lot of accommodations in that meeting. I've been, I think, for a couple of years at university. I went to the group run by Chloe and Annette, and I also went to another group which was more run by neurotypicals. And I think in that group, the other group, not run by Chloe, the sort of differences were that it would be sort of, the neurotypicals would sort of stand and watch in a way. They would sort of be like, oh look, these people are sort of doing their thing, whereas with Chloe and Annette's group, it was a lot more like social, in that it is run by autistic people. And when I went to the other group, it was very much more, you'd still have that neurotypical entrance conversation in a way, like, how are you, how's your week been? And so there's a lot of ground to cover in there, and there's a lot of expectations where you say, oh, I'm good, instead of going on and saying, oh, well, this went wrong, this went right, oh, this makes me feel a bit, this thing makes me feel good. There's a lot less nuance, and there was a lot more, it was a bit weirder in a way.
Thank you. Yeah, that idea of weird, and we're supposed to be the weird ones, but we do experience weirdness ourselves in other spaces. And then we've got David, and then Spencer, I think. David?
Yeah, so I think one of the fundamental differences I have found between non-autistic run autism spaces and like autistic led autistic spaces is the structure. I find non-autistic led spaces, they feel a bit like a free-for-all, and it's kind of a sink or swim thing if you don't understand what's going on. Like, I am, as I like to call it, ADHD. You know, I am autistic and I'm waiting for my ADHD diagnosis. I don't really know when it's my turn to speak in a conversation. My brain's just like, here's the thought, say it now. And non-autistic spaces, like, they really don't like that sort of style of communication. It's considered rude and you're talking over people. They don't understand that I'm not doing it because I want to interrupt you. I'm doing it because if I don't say the thought right now, I might lose the thought, or I'm worried I will lose the thought. But they don't realize that that worry that I might lose my train of thought is coming from the fact that their conversation is so fast paced, back and forth, no structure. Whereas in autistic led spaces, especially the ones that Aucademy does, what I like is there's very much this sort of ethic of, you know, if you want to speak, raise your hand. I need to remember the camera's not mirrored. If you want to speak, raise your hand, you know, we'll take our turns. And because the pressure is off, I don't have to work out for myself when it's my turn to talk, because someone will tell me. And because that pressure is off, I can hold on to my thought and I'm not going to lose it if I don't say it immediately. And I find that, you know, it's really helpful, and it's a much, I don't want to say it's a better way of communicating, but I think actually even non-autistic people could benefit from spaces like that. You know, I think, you know, it's wonderful for autistic people, but non-autistic people should try it as well, because it is so much easier to communicate when there is actually some kind of structure to the conversation.
I think what I would say is, when I have been in spaces where we are running or facilitating them, and they're not necessarily an autistic space per se, in the sense they're not a social group for autistic people, but there's neurotypical people, they do feel like fish out of water, because we've got our way of structuring it and connecting and things like this. And Spencer.
So kind of building off of what David really highlighted in an articulate fashion, because I absolutely agree with it. Having the ability to use both mouthwords and the chat. I also have ADHD. That diagnosis was way before I was diagnosed autistic. I like being able to do that, because if I have a thought, and like David's talking about, it's one of those that you have to get out. You can put it in the chat box and it's going to get read. It's going to be out there, but you can at least use multiple pathways to get across ideas. And that, as David highlighted, it really takes the pressure off, because you can communicate much more proficiently and not feel like you're having to really contemplate the timing of when should I say this, when should I do that. It can be put out there and it's not going to interrupt anybody or do any kind of, you know, it's not going to mess anything up for everybody else. So that way it really flows well. I also wanted to say with autism social spaces, especially with ones run by certain charities here in the States that are led by neurotypicals, they're not really designed for us. They seem to be subtly designed to push us into neurotypical styled socialization. You know, not a casual, enjoyable time, which is what they're supposed to be, but instead sort of camouflaged intervention, hiding these intentions they have of trying to normalize us into social interactions of neurotypicals, sort of thing, which then it's not really fun. It's not good, and nobody ends up feeling comfortable, and you just sit there wasting more spoons.
And then that would be about, they're trying to teach us an unnatural neurotypical social skills, whereas what we really want is to foster our natural autistic social skills, which you do with other autistic people in those good spaces. And Ben says here as well, and then I've got a couple more comments from Ben on David's point, as well as what Spencer's just said. So Ben says, I find that's another reason I find chat box easier, since people can usually just read it, and so I don't have to interject or interrupt, which I find really nervous doing. So I think it's fair to say, Ben, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, with situational mutism, you're anxious around certain things, and so it makes it harder to use mouth words. But like you say, if you've got it in the chat box, one, you're not going to forget what you wanted to say because it's there. And then somebody will bring it in the Aucademy social spaces anyway. We make a real point of making sure that those chat box conversations are part of the bigger discussion, so that they're not second to voice mouth words, right? So we want to make sure everyone is being brought in however they communicate. But also importantly, it doesn't matter for us, I think, necessarily that we might go, you know, that thing that we were talking about 10 minutes ago, okay, I wanted to say something about that thing. Whereas I feel when we're with neurotypical people, we feel really uncomfortable doing that because we've waited so long and held on to, everyone's nodding on the screen, I'm pretty sure. Everyone's nodding like, yes, we know this thing and this feeling. You know, when you're with neurotypical people, maybe you have held on to your point and you've memorized it over and over, and then the moment is gone because they've moved on from whatever it was they were talking about and the conversation is shifted. We don't seem to have that problem so much in our autistic spaces. You might at the start if you're not used to autistic spaces, but nobody is going to find it odd that you go back to something that we were talking about 20 minutes ago, an hour ago, 2 weeks ago, you know, because we just know we process differently and maybe it didn't get a chance to be included at that point in time. And that's so important in our spaces. Ben also wanted to say, even when not forced to use mouth words or have my camera on for something, I could sense their judgment for me wanting to have camera off and use chat box. So this is autism spaces, or is this, yeah, almost as though they want to appear accommodating, but still have stigma over the use of these accommodations. And obviously, although we have to navigate the differences within our community, because some people, we've had a couple of people that really struggled with having autistic members of our groups with using filters. So we had to have conversations around that, the purpose, and see if we could accommodate, because we don't want to exclude anybody. But we also needed to make the point that those filters for many autistic people are so important, because those filters help those people feel confident to be on camera and be part of the discussion in their way. Ben also says, I see posters and flyers for autism social groups around my area, and I don't want to go because I just know they are run by neurotypicals and they treat it like a nursery to get autistics together in order to force socialisation. And I think, is it fair to say, Ben, you mean neurotypical socialisation? Because, I mean, to be fair, we wouldn't force autistic socialisation either, but at least we're going to help foster that if people want that, autistic socialisation. And Victoria.
Now my brain's gone blank, but that's
sorry. There's so many of us.
No,
to get.
that's accepted that that's happened, and it's just a totally different power dynamic, and it's almost you're seen as an object of pity, that someone has to be helped, and you're not seen as being you because they don't really see you as a person. I've discovered. They just see you as an object for change. Whereas in an autistic space, that's very different. And I've been made to speak. They've actually stopped and waited for me to speak. And it's been, and having been in autistic space and then gone into a neurotypical space, and I've suddenly realized how much pressure it actually does put upon you.
And I think when we're in person spaces in our autistic groups, and when we're in our online groups, if we are conscious that somebody's doesn't seem that they're able to engage or contribute, which again, they don't have to, if they just want to be in the space, that's absolutely fine. But some of us might get a sense of like, I've got a feeling this person might have something they want to say, but they're not feeling maybe confident to say it, or whatever it might be. When we're in our online spaces, we can privately message that person and just be like, do you want to just chat to me, or do you want some, you know, if you've got something to say. And certainly when we used to do our in-person groups, we would have autistic people who, like David was saying earlier, and a number of you were saying about that parallel play almost, would be on the outskirts, if you like, of the main body of people, drawing, colouring, you know, headphones on and what have you. And then that meant as facilitators, we could go round without having to drag them into the bigger space and just go and sit with them, ask them about their drawing, and just actually check and say, would you like to have a conversation with me? And they might say yes, or they might say no, I'm actually okay just sitting here drawing. But because we're just open and honest and asking, So we get to include them in that way as well. And David.
Yeah, so Spencer, Ben, and Victoria have all talked about this a bit. You know, the power dynamic in neurotypical-led spaces, and it's like a form of it is a camouflaged intervention almost when you're autistic in neurotypical-led spaces, because they enter these situations like coming from that place where, and I don't want to say it's like neurotypical people's fault because it's the way society works, but they enter these situations believing us to be disordered or have a deficit or an impairment in our communication skills. So what they actually do is they act, it's like a teacher-student dynamic, except in a really patronizing way. And they feel like they have to teach us how to socialize their way rather than, you know, say, okay, well, you've got your own style of socialization, you've got your own social groups. I'm not going to force you to socialize in a way that's like me, you know, but for some reason they can't do that. And I think it's because of this idea, it's because of the pathology paradigm, you know, that idea that if you're different, then there is something wrong. And that's not right, you know, because there is nothing wrong with our style of communication. And it is very patronizing to be in a neurotypical environment where they feel like they have to educate you on the correct way to socialize.
Whereas, like I say, with us, we just check. Are you happy sitting quietly and drawing? Or would you like to come and talk with one other person, and I'll facilitate that? And we've done that in our social spaces when we were in person, you know, to make sure, because if the person doesn't want that, but at least you've checked, you've not made assumptions, we've not assumed that they wanted to be dragged into a conversation with a bigger group, for instance, and things like this.
That's the thing, like when you're in an autistic social space, you are there without expectations. Like, you know, it's enough just to be present, you know, and that is literally it, you know. Beyond that, it's fine, you know. And I think that's a really good thing for people who perhaps are feeling quite isolated by the situation, you know, with all these neurotypical social groups around, you know. It's a good thing.
So I'm going to come to Victoria and Debbie. So Victoria had a couple of comments that I thought were quite good. I don't know if you wanted to speak to those. You were just mentioning about like prescribed sociality.
Yeah, that is the intervention. It is seen that because you do not socialize in that way, that it has to be prescribed to you. And it is there, that is the goal, and there are set goals, and you cannot be who you want to be. So then you sort of, growing up with this, you internalize that and you believe that that is the way you're supposed to be. So even when you go into an autistic space, you go in with all those sort of things that how you are and how you socialize is wrong. So you don't actually know how to be in either space. And when you enter the space, and then when you learn that the inclusion within autistic space is actually done with dignity, and it's done from a genuine point of concern, not concern, but understanding.
And I do actually want to make a comment that, so David's point was absolutely right in a lot of respects, in the sense of, in our autistic social spaces, there's none of those expectations placed on autistic people to perform in a neurotypical way. You can be in that space as yourself, etc. But we're going to get onto this in a minute. But we do have guidelines and structure to help, though. And, you know, because we're also very aware that sadly our community has experienced a lot of trauma And so we're very aware, for instance, there's a few nods on the screen. So we're really aware that we're going to have amazing people in our autistic spaces who there are certain things that we can't have conversations about because it's really going to cause distress and things like that. And we see a lot of care in our spaces around that, for instance, of accepting that people are going to come to that space from different perspectives and from having different experiences that might have been quite distressing. So we want to make sure that we're including those people. Debbie?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on like the kind of patronization and infantilization. I went to a volunteering thing that it wasn't like anything to do with autism or anything, but in a discussion with people there who I hadn't met before, we ended up talking about autism. I ended up saying, oh, I'm autistic. And this woman next to me was like, oh, you're doing really well. I never would have been able to tell. And I think about it from now and again. It makes me really angry. And because it says you could so easily, like, I can imagine the responses that people would be like, oh, that doesn't sound that bad. It sounds like she was being nice. But that small comment is so incredibly layered with so many different ideas and prejudices, and just like this view that like you're not even really a person because if you're just perpetually a child, like people treat you like that, like people treat you like that, which is why I'm actually less likely to be open about being autistic in neurotypical spaces unless I'm like directly asked, which I'm not usually. So because I'm just basically someone said praising the mask, and it's like I shouldn't be needing to. And like sometimes I'm like, if someone says, oh, I couldn't tell, I'm like, really? How can you not? Like, they'll comment on other things like, oh, your humor's really weird, or it took me a while to understand what you meant. And I'm like, well, like, and it just like, it is very interesting how people really have very narrow-minded ideas of what socialization is because they're very used to being catered to. Like even people who know other, like neurotypicals who know other autistic people, but like, and I'm like, you do realize that you're being catered to all the time. And like, well, why would you realize that? No one's going to tell you that. Yeah.
Whereas, like you say, I feel quite confident saying this about our spaces and you folks as facilitators of our spaces, that we don't make those sorts of judgments. We just, if somebody isn't speaking, if somebody's using chat, if somebody, however people are there, we are not placing judgment on that. We are just, that's how they're going to be in that space. That's how maybe they're going to communicate. There's none of that. Hopefully nobody feels infantilized in our spaces because we're just accepting them as they come into that space with no judgment. I'm just going to grab a comment here we've got as well from Ricky saying, the more time I spend in autistic spaces, the more I realise mouth words are not my favourite way to communicate. A few nods on the screen here as well. I've just never had the option until now. Autistic spaces leave me feeling refreshed. And that's good. That's important because it does take energy to spend time with other human beings. And so, yes, you're going to have to use spoons and energy to be in that space, but hopefully you get some back as well. So I want us to talk, particularly new facilitators. So like maybe Debbie and Jack and Spencer can talk about how we actually run Aucademy autistic socials, for instance. So the question I've got is about tips about running an appropriate autistic space. So Debbie's got their hand raised, and then Jack, because you've started doing them recently, and Spencer, yeah?
I actually wanted to talk about how they've changed because I think because I took some time off, quite a long time off, I wouldn't have considered myself a new facilitator because I think I was more like running them over like a year ago, probably over a year ago, and then I stopped doing it for quite a while, and then I came back when there was lots of new rules. So things have changed actually quite a lot, and there's way more structure now and more support for facilitators, which is good. And what was the question?
No, that's really good. So I was just like tips about running them. So I think what you're also, which you can add to, what you're really reflecting is originally with our Aucademy social spaces, they just grew really quickly. So we didn't have any real structure, which is a little bit distressing when you are an autistic person who does enjoy structure. And so it could feel a little bit maybe intimidating for some people, or they're just not sure what to do. And so we recognised that we actually needed some structure. So that I definitely want us to talk about. So for you three in the middle, for instance, and Victoria can talk to this as well, and actually anyone, but yeah, just to talk a little bit around the structure that I think Victoria and Annette and maybe Jessica put together to try and help facilitators of our groups. So Debbie and Jack, do you want to talk to that, and Spencer?
Sure. So
Debbie?
So we have like three main parts of the social. And the first one is happy octopus, sad octopus, which comes from I don't have one on me. There's like a plushie that turns inside out, and one side is a happy face, one side is a sad face. Victoria's got one. Yeah. So like we start, like, it's basically like one good thing about your week and one like not so good thing. So we start with that, and then we have problem solving, which kind of is exactly what it sounds like. And then we have question of the week, sometimes quiz of the week. I'll leave that out to the others to talk about.
Lovely. I'm going to ask Jack, and I just wanted to add as well that with our groups, we do try. It's really hard. Sometimes we don't have enough people who are available, but we try very, very hard we always have two facilitators. So if we only ever have one facilitator, usually it particularly on the Sunday, because the Sundays can be a bit more busy. When I say busy, if you've never come to our space and you want to try them, I don't mean like neurotypical busy. I just mean there's a slightly bigger number of autistic people, but it's not hopefully scary busy. So we always have two facilitators to support one another. That's particularly important if you've got somebody who uses the chat to facilitate, and so you also want somebody who can support to bring them mouthwords, to use mouthwords as well for them. So yeah, we want that sharing of the responsibility, the sharing of the spoons, and also hoping that people don't have to facilitate every single time, so that they get to use the space as just an attendee, because actually we can lose that as facilitators, because if you're there as a facilitator, you're not there necessarily using the space the way that you would as one of the autistic members. So Jack, do you want to talk about the structure and running the space and any tips?
Sure. I think the first thing would be sort of the inclusivity and the sort of acceptance, especially as a facilitator. So the last few weeks, me and Spencer have been doing the Sunday socials, and I use the chat. I don't use mouthwords on Sundays. Spencer doesn't have video on and uses mouthwords, and so that sort of dynamic really works really well with the script. So I can post stuff in the chat, create polls for Spencer's infamous questions of the week, which we all love, and we can sort of work really well with each other and sort of know what's coming next, and it makes the attendees really aware of what's happening next, but also helps us in that we can fall back on a script and sort of say, oh, okay, this is what we can do now that we've done this, or this is something someone said, this is what we can do. And that sort of dynamic. And what I quite like as well, and it's sort of building off what you've said, Chloe, in that it's inclusivity, but also sometimes if it gets really busy, people can act how they choose, in that they can have their video off, they can not use mouth words. Is we also have the breakout rooms there as well, in that people can go to a quiet room if they feel a bit overwhelmed by the main room, just so that they can have a space where they can still chat and interact with others, but also they don't feel as overwhelmed if they are feeling overwhelmed.
And you'll forget, did you mention fun facts with Jack?
I have not, but I do occasionally come up with some fun facts, which are very fastly researched onto the internet and then copy and pasted into the chat.
That's really downplaying it, because it's always very helpful, and it's just really the knowledge that you bring. It's just because I remember we've got another university student, haven't we, called Edith, who's facilitated at different points as well and done things in the students group. But yeah, they sing it, don't they? Like fun facts with Jack, and it's just this lovely thing that you do and bring to the space, which is great. Spencer, want to talk to tips and what we do with structure?
Sure. So both Debbie and Jack have outlined it very, very well. One of the things that, as the user of MouthWords, having Jack be able to have that support and do things to, it's not just doing just the polls, but also sometimes I will miss someone's hand being raised, or may get too far or skip over parts of the chat, because Zoom loves to push you to the very current chat instead of allowing me to go back up and catch up and everything. Having that support to say, hey, this person's got something they need to say or something, that is, I cannot say enough how important that is, because that is hard to keep track of. So that's major. And speaking of the fun facts with Jack, I actually learned where the name Mustang came from for the Ford Mustang, and that was thoroughly enlightening. It actually is cherished. It's part of how we communicate. That information, that substantial information, is almost celebrated. It's like these are things that we actually enjoyed discussing, whereas in neurotypical spaces that would be kind of shunned, and that is very disappointing for them, because there's so much we are able to exchange. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and I'll try to make it as quick as possible, but sometimes we will encounter triggers for people based on past traumas, and it's hard to account for those. We try to do as best we can, but I remember a couple of situations where we had those, and it was almost instantaneous to just track differently. Like, okay, we've hit this, let's get away from that, let's move away from that, let's, moving away from it, even if you're not sure why, there's no questions of, okay, why were you this way? It's like, no, this is something that's bringing up, it's engaging traumas, let's move away from that. If you could move away from that, or something on that line, we make an effort to do that. And I think it speaks to the fact that we are still learning and evolving in that social, and we try to make an effort to at least understand that. We don't always avoid those things, but it is something that we try to do so much. And it's something that is starkly different from the autism social spaces, which focus on, oh, well, that's your trigger, that's your business. Whereas in our spaces, there is understanding and there is a respect out of that. And having that trust when people can say, hey, this is triggering, can we move to something else? They want to come back because it's a safer place, and it makes everyone else feel safer because of that. So not trying to toot my own horn or with the socials, but it is something I've noticed, and it does feel very safe and trusting.
And that's fantastic as well, because we've also, and it's quite sad sometimes when we've had new autistic people join the group, and you know, they've felt uncomfortable by something. So we did have somebody who was finding it a bit weird to see people as filters, and they were finding that really difficult. What was really sad though is that they thought that, you know, they let us know that they found it uncomfortable, and that's really important that people feel that they can do that. But what was really sad is they were like, I understand if you need to ban me. And we're like, no, why would we ban? You know, we're not going to do that. We are going to, if we can accommodate, and like I say, it does get a bit difficult, because we're going to make sure that if a lot of people need to use filters to be in that space, for instance, that's really important. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not just, you know, losing amazing autistic people who maybe have tried so many spaces and not been able to engage or feel comfortable, or felt like they've had to be turned away or actually been banned. And we really don't want that. If you are not there trying to be unkind, then we've got time for you, which is so important. And Ben says, if we're going to ban anyone, it will be me for being too dang cute. Yes, Ben, you are an adorable potato. And Victoria, do you want to talk about the structure? Because like I said, you did used to try and facilitate, and it was really hard because of that difficulty starting.
Yeah, I just cannot start conversations no matter how hard I try. And that pressure and the demand to speak just gets too much, but at the same time still wanted to facilitate, and ordinarily I wouldn't have that sort of opportunity. So introducing a structure for me meant that, because I can forget things, I can't hold it all in my head. That script, there is an actual script there, and there isn't a demand to use that script, but knowing that that's there sort of relaxes me and enables me to start. So once I can start doing that, I'm okay. And also by having that script, people and that structure, people coming into the space can be told this is what is going to happen. This is the structure, so they know what is coming next, and that can reduce a lot of the stress as well.
And like I say, it is a big structure. So I'm not necessarily going to share it. I was thinking about it, but it's a very long structure, because it really is broken down, isn't it? But like you said, yeah, Victoria, you don't necessarily have to use it, but it exists.
Yeah, and I think that was when we did introduce it, and for new facilitators and people coming in, there was a lot of, it put people off, because there was that thing that you have to use that, and it's like, no, that's not what it's there for. It's not telling you what to say. It is just there for some of us whose memory is, I lose thoughts, I lose words, and so it is there as a fallback, as a support, whether you or not choose to use it, and you can adapt it and change it and everything like that, and that's fine.
Yes, Jack.
I was just sort of adding to that, in that I remember in sort of Happy and Sad Octopus, which is at the sort of very start of the social, as well as sort of sticking to that structure and having that as well, we've been able to go off on tangents, so to speak, to sort of talk about things that are interesting and that people have done in their week. So, for instance, I think one week we talked about castles for a bit, because someone went on a trip to a castle, and we were able to have that discussion, but also have people be able to talk about their week and their Happy and Sad Octopus throughout that time as well. And I think that's really great.
And like I say, you do a bit of problem solving if people want to do that as well, so that they know they've got that time if they want to they and the problem could be anything, I'm assuming as well. Like, when we've been in our student spaces, it can revolve around essays and trying to get accommodations at university and things like that. Sometimes people want advice on their PIP assessments and trying to get support to understand. So PIP in the UK is our sort of disability benefits and things like that. So just having somebody that they might be able to ask just to give some advice, I think we get some of that kind of stuff as well. Spencer, can you talk to the question of the week, and do we have one that we can?
I usually, the questions of the week, I try to formulate something that is, it will never happen, or at least highly improbable to happen in reality. But it's a choice. You get some sort of weird benefit, and you have some absurd thing to get that. So for example, you can touch any vehicle with your bare hands, but in order to, and you get that car, but if you get that car, you either have to choose between damp seats or a cassette tape playing a song on repeat every time the car is running. Typically there's a whole story or a backline behind it that I just kind of sketch out. The thing is, for the questions of the week, is I really enjoy the fact that whenever I bring those up, there is so much contemplation and looking for various holes or various loopholes within that whole thing of like, okay, well, I could do this, and then I could get around the disadvantage of this. And I honestly, even though I will seem kind of frustrated, I really do absolutely revel in that discussion of that. It's not just, oh, well, I'll just take this one because this seems less bad than the other. No, there's a lot of actual discussion of that, and it makes it just really incredible. And there's way less pressure because it doesn't really happen in reality. So you're not saying, if you had $1 million, what would you buy first? That puts pressure on financial and other considerations. It's a, weird thing that will not happen in this dimension of reality. And also I involve horse pun names like James Mustang Bill Mustang, James Bronco, Louis Thoroughbred. So yes, that's anyway, that I try to keep that as short as possible, but I love preparing it. I love the interaction, and it makes everything wonderful to end on.
And I just think, do neurotypical people do that? Do they have that level of fun that we get where we get into the nitty gritty of like you say, asking a random question? I remember in our university group, the question being, is water wet? And that went on for weeks of just picking apart, is water wet, for instance. And I just think, I can see Jack as well smiling, and Debbie, because were you there for those ones as well? The is water wet? Can you talk about that? Didn't it go on for weeks and there was like debates about it? Yeah, Jack.
I think it's still going on. I think there's still some controversial opinion about that, and I think it was very hotly debated about it. I think I came down on the side that it's water is dry, but the surface it touches is wet, or something like that. But yeah, it was a good discussion. But
that's just the nature of conversations. It's not necessarily that idea of socialization from a neurotypical perspective. It's let's pick this thing apart because it's interesting. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so got a final question before we do our final questions, as in our stems and potato question. I want to ask, and I'm going to ask David because they've not spoken for a bit, and Jack as well, and Ben. Why are autistic facilitated spaces important? David, some thoughts to that?
I think fundamentally, for me at least, it's a space where I can be me. Like, there's so much of the world that I can't be me, because if I try and be me, people will tell me that I need to sort this out about myself, or I need to do more of this and less of that. And, the way my brain works just isn't compatible with so many situations that
Thank you, David. And we have this question because Sai wanted us to talk about this. And also, I want to flag how important and lovely it is that in our autistic spaces, people can feel comfortable to say, I've had enough, I need to leave now. So Sai has left the live because they've run out of spoons, and it's so important that they felt safe and comfortable to be able to do that. So, you know, some people will worry that they have to spend the whole 2 hours in our social spaces online. You don't. You can drop in and out whenever you like. It's really not important that, you know, you're there for the whole time. And so Sai wanted us to ask or address this question of, you know, why are autistic facilitated spaces important? I can't help it because it's just made me pay attention, but Spencer has teleported to a completely different room, which is amazing. So yes, Sai wanted us to talk about why are autistic facilitated spaces important, and Sai said something building on what David just said, which is it's a literal lifeline. It means not being alone. And that can be really important. So for some autistic people that we might meet, ours are the only forms of socialization and connection that they might have, and that is so important that we have those spaces. So Ben, any thoughts on why they're so important? And then anyone else can free for. I think I've got Debbie next, and then if anyone else wanted. So Ben says, we can empathise with each other better to make the space accommodating in a way that isn't seen as an inconvenience, which it appears as in non-autistic spaces. So yeah, talking to that importance. And, you know, we've had some really lovely comments in the comment section as well, people chatting with each other, some silliness as well, which is also what I love about our, so this is the thing, you know, we're talking about our autistic social spaces, which are closed groups. They're closed Zoom spaces that you can only enter if you're an autistic person and that you're okay with our guidelines. So we have really clear guidelines, for instance, that we will not tolerate you know, prejudice and discrimination. We're very inclusive in regards to LGBTQIA people, Black people, people of colour. You know, we will not tolerate you know, any forms of prejudice and discrimination in our spaces, and that's something important that we flag as well to people so that they know that that's a safe space that they can come to. I've lost my train of thought. What was my train of thought? Oh yeah, okay. So, you know, those are very closed spaces because we keep those people safe by, you know, they're not, some of them are not openly autistic in their hometowns and things like this, so they don't actually want people to know that they're autistic, so they make their own Facebook pages that are specifically so they can join our groups and things like that. But what's also really lovely is this here as a live, and also when you watch it back, we will be interacting as an autistic space in the comment section as well. So there's a lots of funny, silly comments going on in Facebook. You know, somebody was talking about koala bears and different types of bears for some reason. And, you know, Callum Bratso, who we've had on before, fantastic autistic advocate, is also saying that these kinds of conversation is so valuable for me as an autistic adult peer support group facilitator under a neurotypical charity. And I think that, you know, we can talk as a group, as Aucademy, about maybe slightly adapting the structure that we created and actually publishing it. I'll talk to Annette about that, so that other people can grab that structure and have an idea of how to do that. The reason I need to change it is because it's got some details about like our Zoom account and things like that, which we don't want to make accessible to absolutely everybody. Where are we? And then I'm going to jump in with Sai, and then Debbie, right. So catching up with who's next. So Sai here says Autistics. So Sai is still here. So Sai just couldn't be, had no energy left to be on screen. So they're in the chat box. So Sai says autistic spaces are a lifeline when society has gaslit and marginalised you for decades. It gives you time and space to be around like-minded people with similar experiences, not being alone when feeling unalive thoughts. Autistic spaces can be literal lifesavers, using literal in the literal sense. Victoria, did you want to speak to that? And then I can go to Debbie.
Yeah, I think so often when I've been very, very much struggling and have been let down, actually the online space has saved. And even if it is just that one point in the week for a couple of hours where you can be around people who understand, you don't have to apologize, you don't have to second guess. And it was like last Christmas when it was bad, it was tough, but there was other people were there at the same time, and it didn't matter whether you weren't speaking or anything. There was that space where you could just be, and other people understood as well. And that was worth far more than any intervention, any therapy, anything else, and could give.
And I'm pleased that we have those spaces for the amazing autistic people, because people are missing out so much. When I just get excited when I meet a new autistic person, I'm like, oh, another friend, right? Another person to actually have those conversations with about really random topics and things.
And there's the joy, and that's what often is forgotten. It's assumed that an autistic space will be miserable, that there's some tragic figures, but it isn't. The sort of the most random space you've ever been in, and that's what I love about it, is that sort of the randomness of it and the tangents, and it's just people being themselves. Yeah.
I think, is this one of your social group members? It is, isn't it? Spencer's laughing. So Paco here says, glad to see Spencer survive traversing a Bill Mustang wormhole. I'm assuming that means something to you.
Sorry, that was yeah. The other time there was a James Bronco's dimensional mirror Bill Mustang. So that's yes. I don't know why I put in a dimensional wormhole into the questions of the week, but I did, and now it's part of the lore, I guess.
And Debbie, why are autistic spaces so important?
I think this has become really highlighted to me in the last few weeks, where I've visited some family and some friends, and it's kind of like, because I haven't been in like those types of social spaces for so long, my mind kind of just goes boing like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, just like, what the hell is going on? And like in some place, in some NT, well, like it's not an NT space, it's just like friends like socializing with their NTs randomly in the wild. It can be fun, can be a bit like playing a game, but boy, am I tired every day. I usually wake up with a headache, because the thing is like, it's a very delicate mix between masking and just having some fun, depending on how much you care what people think of you, which probably shouldn't be anything at all, but I'm not perfect. And then like in some situations it's really bad, like with like family, like I very much feel like they're tolerating me, even though I'm not, and all that I'm a burden, even though I'm not doing anything, like I'm literally I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but they just treat you like that, and it feels really, really crap. And then I come to one of these, or the socials, and it is like, it's completely refreshing. It's like, it reminds me the first time I ever walked into autistic space was the University of Kent Autistics. It was when it was before the pandemic, so it was in person. The first time I walked into that room, I was like astounded. I could never really describe it very well, but like I've never experienced that before, of walking into somewhere and just feeling, just being there and not having like all of those pressures that I subconsciously had on before were like just lifted. Yeah, feeling seen. Just like it's pretty sick, yeah. Gnarly. 10 out of 10.
And Jack?
Yeah, I remember when I first went to the UK group, and I remember because I think I stood by the door for about 30 minutes, and because I didn't know if it was the right group or not, and I didn't want to ask anybody, but in that time there was no pressure for me to interact, and when I did interact, it was really, really nice, and it was really comforting, and it was really accepting and inclusive, and that's what I found really, really great.
Lovely. Because I've got a chapter in a very expensive book coming up. Ask your libraries to get them so you don't have to buy the book, where I talk about the real healing properties of autistic spaces, and I'm going to give a talk for, I think it's a psychiatric or it's a conference for psychologists and psychiatrists, I think, and the talk I'm actually going to give is called Healing from the Culture of Autism. And I think when I'm talking about that, what I'm talking about is that, you know, we are very much traumatized, and I don't use that word lightly, I don't use that flippantly, by living in a society that's not built for us. We, you know, do live in a very disordered society, and a lot of that internalized ableism. So I'm going to bring up Sai's comment that they've made in the comment section as well. You know, we feel broken, we don't connect particularly well with other human beings based on you know, the negative experiences that we've had. And it's so important to come into these spaces. I really do feel we start to heal, like psychologically, by being around other autistic people, if you find the right space for you. Now, that's not to say that our autistic spaces on Aucademy are exactly what you're after, and that's okay, right? It's about finding a space where you feel comfortable to be yourself and feel safe to do that. And I have permission, because I had to seek permission to use certain quotes and analogies for this chapter that I'm talking about. I don't remember the chapter's name. Autistic Identity, Culture, Community and Space for Wellbeing, something along those lines. It's very long and waffly. But I talk about, you know, some of those similar things. Like say, Jack, you know, coming into the spaces and then you start to feel able to be yourself a bit more. And I give an example of one of the lovely autistic students that we had at the time who came to our spaces, and they were very quiet, absolutely fine. And initially I just started noticing them putting tiny little things on their head, and they didn't think anyone could notice. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. What is this? Why are we doing this? And because I was genuinely interested, not, oh, that's weird, what are you doing that for? It was, oh, what is this? And they explained very quietly, they just like the feel of things on their head. And over weeks, those things got bigger and bigger until it was a pillow, because they could be in that space and nobody was going to judge them. Like, if anything, I was just enthusiastic of like, oh, this is lovely, this is exciting, why are we doing this? And eventually, exactly, Katie, like you do, Kate. So our lovely Katie Monday likes also putting things on their head. And Katie is saying here, hat, because it's exactly what this lovely student would do. They would put things on their head and just go hat, because it was just something stimmy, something really enjoyable. And those spaces are safe to do that. And that's what's important. Got this lovely person on YouTube saying this live stream gave them courage to ask how to connect. I hope I can connect with others soon. Thank you. I have linked that person to our group, so you can meet these lovely people that you can see on screen, Trisha, and you can actually meet this lovely potato who's just given you some lovely side eye. Did anyone want to jump in with any final thoughts around this kind of topic? Is that Victoria? No? Sure?
My brain's gone really blank. No, brain totally gone.
Your brain's gone.
2 years.
Anyone else got any thoughts around this very final question, which is, you know, why these spaces are so important? Or are we done? Everyone's like, I've got no spoons left. Yes, Jack.
I think just reiterating the importance of connectivity and being part of a community, because we're out here, we're there, and sometimes when you're not part of a community, it can feel like a very lonely place to be in, and you feel like you're the only person that experiences certain things. And I think one of the joys that we've had in facilitating is being able to find people who will say, oh, I just do this random thing, not really sure, maybe it's a bit weird, maybe I don't know. And then other people will say, I do that. And then we connect in that way. And we say, oh, that's an autistic thing that we all do, but we haven't thought about it because we've thought in our heads before that it's a thing that we do on our own, and it's something that, it's something that made us feel alone or separate. And we find that a community of other people are doing it as well. Yeah.
Actually, Victoria, can you speak to that? And then I've got Si's comment and then David.
For me also, it's realizing, and that was the biggest thing, was there are different ways to be autistic, because I didn't have those strong interests in, say, films or Star Trek. I was in wonderment at people's memories. I just sit there but I sat there because I can't remember things. I can't sit and give quotes. And I thought, is this what it is to be autistic? Because I can't be like that. Therefore, I'm not neurotypical. I'm not autistic. And then it was realizing, no. And that was the sort of the Nick Walker things on neuroqueer. You just can be who you want to be. And it is being in a space where there is that freedom to be who you want to be and find out who you want to be. And you don't get that in a neurotypical space because everybody is going towards being a certain way. And that is different in an autistic space.
Fantastic. So Katie here saying there are just so many things you don't have to explain when you're in an autistic group. Tics, stims, spoons, low energy, words not wording, brain fog. How many of us say words not wording when we're really struggling to find the word that we want, or it's not coming out quite right? Or brain not braining. We say these things and it makes sense to other autistic people. So we've got Si here saying being around validation and acceptance is so important for confidence and getting rid of internalized ableism. Knowing you're not broken, that you aren't alone or a burden can be so joyous to know and feel. And David?
I think the other thing is that autistic spaces, like, it's an act of defiance. It's an act of neuroqueering in a society that wants us to assimilate and behave in a particular way that is not natural to us. Autistic socialization is defiantly saying, okay, I'll socialize, but I'm going to do it on my terms. And I think that's a really wonderful thing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Oh, interesting, Victoria. So you're saying without Si, you would never have stayed in the space?
No, because when I went into the space, the very beginning, I was just absolutely paralyzed, and he just supported me via messaging, and he just reassured me that it was okay. And it took a long time to actually be able to be in that space, but he kept me there.
And I think that's what's important, and what's actually been quite nice. So we had earlier on a comment from Manushka saying about Victoria, they don't think you realise how much you've helped them, for instance. And I think that's what's lovely, that you all, including myself, will get something different from those spaces. And actually, oh, look at little Si's like happy crying, I think, about the comment that Victoria's just made. You know, we're so used to potentially not feeling that we have any value or any self-worth, and not valued or feeling valid by other people. And actually, in our autistic spaces, you are, and I think we don't recognize that. And so I want to actually say this on camera: I am so appreciative of every single of this autistic facilitator who does our Aucademy groups, because, well, you know what you get out of it, but also you are giving so much as well. And as soon as I've won the lottery, you are all going to like be able to quit jobs. And that's the plan. We're just going to do this and scoop all the other auties that need this safe spaces. That's the plan. It's not a cult, I promise. Everyone's allowed to leave whenever they like. Oh, and lovely Katie, this love the community and family. It is a lovely space. All my true friendships and connections have been in and because of autistic spaces. So they are so important. I'm not pinning Ben's last comment on Facebook. Anyone is welcome to have a look at it, but I'm not going to pin it. So I'm going to ask, unless anyone's got any final thoughts or comments that they really would like to.
Yeah, just really quickly. Victoria put in the chat desocialization, and I think that's such a cool term for it, because it's like taking the traditional neurotypical socialization and turning it on its head. And I think it's a word we need to get out there, because it just sums it up perfectly.
Fantastic. We always have to, Katie came up with neuroanarchy, and there's always fantastic things that come up from all these amazing autistic people that we meet. So our final questions. Thank you everyone for spending so much time with us today. We've all got inertia. That's also a thing in autistic spaces, where we just end up stuck and we just stay here because this is where we live now, in this box. But I'm going to ask one of my favorite last questions, which is, what is your current or favorite or new stim? I'm going to start with David, and then we're going to go around.
Okay, so the current stim I have at the moment is I keep doing this and like rubbing the end of my nose. I haven't worked out exactly what it is I get from it, but I do it a lot. Nice. And my favorite stim though, and I think I've said this before, and it's like Marmite for people. They either love it or hate it. It's cracking my joints. I crack myself like a glow stick quite regularly. And I'm twitching my leg, like hopping my leg up and down. That's a particularly good one for when I'm full of nervous energy. So, take your pick from those three. Nice.
Having a repertoire is very important. Ben, any new or current stims? New stim is waving and whacking 2 stainless steel rods around. This is true. This is actually what you have been doing. So you can't actually tell because Ben is a potato right now, but Ben's got amazing room full of like Marvel, all sorts of things related to Marvel and his dedicated interests. And you've got a new shelving and these 2 random rods that he just is like twirling like batons and all sorts. So that's your new one. Spencer?
My favorite stim is actually yo-yos. So this one is my current favorite right now. There we go. It is the Ouroboros. It is what a really just wonderful yo-yo. I just got it actually this week. This is one that I've been wanting to get for a while, so it's been fantastic. And also just wanted to mention my favorite potato before I nodded off here is scalloped or hashed. So that's what I've been up to these days.
Ben is still upset though, because Ben wants the answer to be Ben is the favourite form of potato. And Victoria, favourite or new stim?
I think swaying more. Before I would just sit entirely still and sort of ever so slightly moving more than I used to. But yeah, it's always these different sort of gel-like squishy things I quite like as well. But I think it is more actually moving.
Nice. You've always got something new and twangly and fun looking, like some little toy or something as well. And then I'm like, oh, new thing. Also on a flag, so Spencer's also had to disappear because I think because of the time difference as well for them, because they're over in the States. But I did flag on the screen for people, and it's in the comment section if you're on Facebook or YouTube, so you can hopefully get the link quite easily. Our Aucademy Especially Interesting podcast, which is hosted by our lovely David on screen and Tigger. Yep. And the reason I'm flagging it is because if you want to hear Spencer talking about yo-yos, which I did not think would be particularly interesting, I'm going to say, it is actually a really interesting podcast because it's an autistic podcast where autistic people talk about their dedicated interests. So even if you are not interested in the thing, it's actually really interesting to listen to.
I find it especially interesting.
It was especially interesting. It was. So the yo-yo one with Spencer was great, and Ben has recently done one on their dedicated interest around Marvel and things. So there's that over there as well. Jack, recent or favourite or current stim?
Well, my current stim at the moment, I've been doing this as we've been doing this live, and then I also quite like auditory stims, so I quite like listening to music over and over again. So I've been listening to that quite a lot.
Fantastic. And mine's still an oldie but a goodie. So I sort of stopped for a little while wearing some of my spin rings, and now I've gone back to them again. So I forget that I'm doing it. It's really lovely, really unconscious stim to sit with like a fidget ring. So this one's got like two spinning rings going around it. Okay, and final question. What is everyone's favourite form of potato? Ben, what is actually your favourite form of potato? Or is that cannibalism because you are a potato? It is yourself. Okay. Fine. I'm going to start with Jack this time. So Jack, favourite form of potato?
To eat, I quite like roast potatoes, and while we've been doing the live, I did look up there are 4,000 varieties of native potatoes and over 180 wild potato species. The one that I quite like the look of, just from looking at it, is the vitellotti. It's purple, which I quite like.
Nice. See, fun facts with Jack. We now know lots about potatoes. Victoria and David, favourite potatoes?
Okay, Ben.
For those who can't see, Ben is now really big, grinning, really close to the camera as a potato.
Finally
David?
given into it. No, yes. I don't know, favourite potato. Hash browns. Sorry, Ben.
David?
Okay, so my favourite potato to look at, of course, is Ben. But the top of my list now to grow, and I'm going to have to grow it, is I pulled a Jack on this one. I went on the internet whilst we were doing this live, and I looked up rare types of potato, and there's one called Solanum tuberosum, also known as the true blue potato. And it looks like a regular potato, but when you cut it open, it's like a blue-purple color. and it looks awesome. So I need to grow these now and find out if they taste like regular potatoes or if they taste like blue potatoes, because blue tastes different to normal potato in my head. So
I need to know if a blue potato tastes like a blue
Yeah.
potato. And we still have Sai's comment around their favourite form of potato. Everyone ready? So Sai says, you know when you're camping and you have one spud left, all of a sudden there's a torrential downpour and the only hope of survival is to scoop out the innards of the small potato at your feet, and craft that empty shell into a hamster-sized canoe to ride the whitewater rapids and row with a half-eaten chicken wing to safety. Yeah, not that one. Yes, we get a lovely story about potatoes every week from our lovely Sai as well. So thank you everybody so much for being here. Oh, so we've got fact of the week. We've had lots of facts. This is really because we've had facts with Jack. We've had the question of the week. I need to now wait for the ticker to go back through. Fact of the week: nighttime is the natural state of the universe. Daytime is only caused by a nearby radiating ball of fire. This is very true. Thank you for that, Sai. Thank you, everybody. So next Wednesday session, we have Jules and Megan discussing their book, I Will Die on This Hill. So if you don't know Jules and Megan already, Megan is of Not an Autism Mum and That Awesome Book Club, and Jules is of Autistic Typing. I think it's just Autistic and Typing, is it? Yeah, lovely. And so they're going to be discussing their very important book that they have published together. Thank you, everyone. We're going to awkward wave and do the outro music when I find the outro music. Everyone, awkward wave.
Wow.